December 7th, 1941, 230 miles north of Oahu. The sea is black glass under a moon that is already fading, and the cold bites through wool and leather as men move with practiced silence across the flight deck of the carrier Akagi. You can smell it first, aviation fuel, sharp and sweet, seeping from hoses and caps, oil on steel, salt wind. Then the sound builds, one engine at a time until the deck vibrates under your boots. A Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber rolls forward, its wings trembling, its crew hunched under helmets and goggles. Nearby, an Aichi D-3A dive bomber sits like a crouching insect, bomb cradled beneath its belly. Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters idle in neat rows, their prop wash tossing loose canvas and making signal flags snap like whips. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is not on the deck. He is inside the carrier with his chief of staff, Rear Admiral Ryunosuke Kusaka, listening to reports, watching the clock, and trusting the plan that has already been rehearsed into muscle memory. On deck, officers with clipboards and white gloves signal and shout into the roar. Men bow quickly, not out of ceremony, but out of instinct, then run to clear the lanes. The first wave begins to launch. A bomber lurches down the deck, tail lifting, then the nose, and suddenly it is gone into the dim. Another follows, and another. The carrier's deck crew barely has time to breathe between launches, their arms raised, their bodies angled against the prop blast. Each aircraft peels away and disappears toward the south, toward a sleeping harbor that Japanese planners have studied until it feels familiar. In the leading aircraft of the strike, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida leans forward, scanning through the canopy. He is the air group commander, chosen to coordinate the first attack. The sky ahead is a hardening blue. Beneath, the ocean is empty, indifferent, as if nothing human is happening at all. But it is happening. It is happening with clocks and maps and assumptions. In the months leading to this morning, Japanese naval officers have talked about Americans in a tone that mixes respect for industrial power with disdain for decision-making. They study American exercises, American peacetime habits, the way battleships sit heavy and proud in harbor. They tell each other that the United States is slow to move, slow to adapt, that American commanders will cling to doctrine and routine, and that routine can be attacked. Out here, in the air, you feel the confidence not as a speech, but as a calm. The formation holds steady. Radios stay mostly silent. There is a grim satisfaction in how smoothly it all fits together, like gears meshing. Then land appears. Oahu, dark green and shadowed, ringed with surf. The sun breaks the horizon in a thin line of fire. It catches the wings, the canopies, the metal. The planes descend, and the island rises. Roads and roofs, fields, and then, ahead, the pale ribbon of Pearl Harbor and the neat geometry of moored ships. For a moment, the harbor looks like a photograph laid out for inspection. Battleships at Battleship Row, destroyers, cruisers, men on decks who have not yet understood what the distant engines mean. Fuchida's eyes harden. He watches for the telltale signs of alertness. Anti-aircraft guns already swinging, smoke rising from boilers, ships moving. There is little of that. At 7:49 a.m. local time, he sends the signal that will echo through Japanese naval memory. Tora, Tora, Tora. The message crackles through the air like a blade drawn free, confirming surprise, confirming that the enemy is not ready. The first torpedoes drop, sliding into the water and knifing forward. Bombs fall in clean arcs. Zeros strafe airfields, their machine guns stitching the ground, shredding parked aircraft before pilots can reach them. In the harbor, plumes of water leap up beside hulls. Steel screams. Fuel ignites. The morning turns orange and black. From above, the results look brutally simple. Ships that cannot dodge, planes that cannot take off, men running in lines that break into chaos. Back aboard a Kogi, hours later, the mood tightens into something that feels like triumph but also like inevitability. Aircraft return with holes in their wings, with smoke stains on fuselages, with crews whose faces are pale behind salt and sweat. Deck crews swarm them. Mechanics shout. Officers count. Mark. Compare. Reports come in like beads on a string. Battleships hit. Airfields neutralized. Fires raging. In the ready rooms and wardrooms. Some officers allow themselves the first jokes. The Americans, they say, were lined up like targets. Their commanders let the fleet sit still. Their response is confused. Their counterpunch will be late. They do not say it loudly where it might sound like arrogance. They say it with the quiet certainty of men who believe they have proven a theory. That American leadership is predictable. That the enemy will react the way an enemy in a book reacts. And far away, at Combined Fleet Headquarters, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto receives the first confirmations. He is not celebrating. He is listening, weighing, already thinking beyond the smoke over Pearl Harbor. He knows what has been struck, and he knows what has not. He knows the Americans will not stay slow forever. But around him, the victory feels like a door kicked open. It reinforces a dangerous belief spreading through the Navy like warmed blood. If American commanders were caught asleep today, then perhaps they can be outthought tomorrow. Below decks, in the wardroom light, cups clink. Someone pours tea. Someone else pours something stronger. The talk keeps circling the same point like a finger worrying a sore tooth. They were asleep. An officer runs a hand along the edge of a map and taps Pearl Harbor with a knuckle as if it is a dent in the American skull. Another imitates an American radio voice, slow and uncertain, and the men around him laugh. Not the loud laugh of boys, but the controlled, satisfied amusement of professionals who believe they have just proven the enemy's weakness. Rear Admiral Kusaka listens without encouraging it, but he does not stop it either. He has seen American ships burning. He has seen the order of the harbor, the lack of movement, the late firing of guns. A belief settles deeper. American commanders are cautious to the point of paralysis. They will respond with committees and paperwork, not instinct. Even Nagumo, careful and inward, allows himself a small nod when the numbers are read out again. Damage inflicted. Aircraft losses acceptable. Surprise achieved. The men do not need to say the larger conclusion out loud. It is already in the way they breathe. Far to the west, in Tokyo and at fleet headquarters, the same confidence ripples through meetings and corridors. In crisp uniforms, staff officers shuffle papers that smell of fresh ink. Victory reports arrive like gifts. Yet inside that machine, Yamamoto remains a man standing in a current he cannot fully control. He reads. He exhales. He looks again at what is missing. No American carriers among the wreckage. The enemy's most agile striking arm still lives. In his mind, that fact is a splinter. Across the Pacific, the splinter becomes a knife. December 31st, 1941. Pearl Harbor, still raw. The harbor water carries a film of oil that paints everything with a rainbow sheen. Burnt metal and salt hang in the air. Crews work around the clock, faces smeared with grime, voices hoarse. When a torch flares, the light reflects off blackened hulls like a warning. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz arrives to take command of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He steps onto the pier with a steady gait that does not match the wreckage around him. Sailors notice the set of his shoulders, the way he looks at the harbor, not like a graveyard, but like a problem to solve. He tours the damage. He sees twisted iron and shattered superstructures. He smells smoke baked into paint. He listens to officers explain what happened, and he does not waste time on comfort. His questions are direct. What is afloat? What can be repaired? What carriers remain? What submarines are operational? What can strike back? In a dim room where maps cover the walls, Nimitz meets men who speak in numbers and radio intercepts. Intelligence is not glamorous. It is cigarette smoke, tired eyes, and pencil marks. It is a steady drip of clues, sometimes meaningless, sometimes sharp enough to cut. The Americans begin to move in ways the Japanese wardroom jokes did not predict. Raid by raid. The U.S. Navy tests its carriers like a boxer checking his stance after a punch. Early strikes feel small compared to the scale of Pearl Harbor, but they carry a different message. Carriers can appear, hit, and vanish. The ocean is wide, and it hides both hunter and prey. April 18th, 1942. Two American carriers, Hornet and Enterprise, push west into dangerous water on Hornet's deck. Army bombers sit where naval aircraft should be. B-25 Mitchells, their noses pointed toward the unknown, engines rumbling in the wet wind. Men move with tense urgency, eyes flicking to the horizon as if expecting Japanese masts to rise out of it. When those bombers launch toward Tokyo, it is not a decisive blow, but it is a psychological rupture. In Japan, air raid sirens wail where they were not supposed to. Civilians look up and see the unthinkable. Officers who mocked American reach go quiet for a moment, then harden. The humiliation demands an answer. In the following weeks, Japanese planning shifts. Yamamoto presses for a trap, a battle that will draw out and destroy the American carriers that escaped Pearl Harbor. He wants a clean finish, the kind that makes the future predictable again. And while Japanese staff officers argue routes and timings, the Americans keep learning, painfully and quickly. May 1942, the Coral Sea. Two carrier forces fight without seeing each other directly, trading aircraft across empty miles. Dive bombers scream down through clouds, torpedoes streak beneath waves, and carriers turn hard as their decks fill with armed planes. The Americans lose Lexington, but they do not fold. They prove they can meet Japanese carriers and bloody them in Japanese ready rooms. The tone changes. The jokes become thinner. The Americans are still called slow, still called clumsy, but now those words sound like a charm repeated to ward off doubt. And in a quiet intelligence space in Hawaii, men listen to intercepted signals, sort call signs, and chase patterns. Each decoded fragment feels like a nail being driven into a board. The outline of a new Japanese operation begins to form, faint but unmistakable. Somewhere out in the Pacific, the next battlefield is already waiting, and both sides are walking toward it with different illusions in their heads. This is not the kind of place where victory is supposed to be born. There are no banners, no brass bands, just minds grinding against time. A Navy lieutenant pulls off his headphones and rubs his eyes until the skin around them reddens. Another man, older, listens again to a strip of intercepted Morse, his jaw tightening each time the rhythm repeats. They have been chasing the Japanese naval code. JN-25 like hunters following tracks in a storm. Sometimes the trail vanishes, sometimes it reappears, sharper than before. They keep seeing two characters in the traffic. AF. AF is coming up again. AF needs water. AF is being prepared. AF is the objective. But what is AF? Nimitz stands in his headquarters nearby, surrounded by charts of the Central Pacific. He knows the Japanese want something. He knows they want to draw his carriers out. He also knows he cannot guess. Guessing is how men die at sea. So the intelligence officers propose a test. On Midway Atoll, a speck of coral and sand that barely rises above the Pacific. The Americans send a message in the clear. A simple report. The desalination plant on Midway has broken. They are short of fresh water. It is bait made of plain words. The Japanese bite without realizing it. Their coded traffic soon mentions that AF is short of water. In the room in Hawaii, The confirmation lands like a weight on the table. AF is Midway. Now the outline becomes a map. Midway will be struck. The American carriers will be hunted. Yamamoto intends to finish what Pearl Harbor began. Nimitz does not panic. He does not talk about revenge. He talks about positioning. He has 3 carriers he can commit, Enterprise and Hornet, and the battered Yorktown, fresh from Coral Sea, dragged into Pearl Harbor with scars still open. Her flight deck has burns. Her hull has damage. Men work with a desperation that feels like prayer. Welding, patching, hauling. The shipyard becomes a forge. Sparks fly into the night. The smell of hot metal mixes with seawater. Yorktown must sail, even if she is not whole when she leaves. Men watch her go with a strange affection, like watching an injured fighter step back into the ring. The ship's wake spreads behind her like a white ribbon, and beyond that ribbon waits an enemy who still believes he dictates the rhythm of war. June 3rd, 1942. Midway Atoll. The sky is bright and hard, the sunlight reflecting off the lagoon until your eyes squint. The air tastes of salt and coral dust. On the island, Marines and sailors move among sandbagged gun positions and hastily built revetments. Aircraft sit on the runways, a mixed zoo of bombers and fighters, some modern, some already aging. In the distance, American patrol planes search the horizon, engines drone. Eyes scan. Then a Catalina spots something. A shape on the sea that does not belong. A Japanese transport force, moving toward Midway. The report is radioed out, and the Pacific suddenly feels smaller. The Americans strike first, but it is not yet the decisive blow. Bombers lumber out, their crews hunched over instruments, and they find the Japanese ships far away, across miles of empty water. They attack in 1s and 2s. Bombs splash. Some ships take hits, but the Japanese keep moving. In Nagumo's flagship, Akagi, the mood is cool and professional. 4 fleet carriers are in his force Akagi. Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, the striking power that smashed Pearl Harbor. The decks are alive with aircraft. Their engines tested, their bombs and torpedoes prepared. There is a quiet pride among his officers. They have done this before. They believe the Americans will respond in the same predictable way, rushing forward, disorganized. Too late. Before dawn on June 4th, Nagumo launches his first strike against Midway. In the dim light, aircraft lift off one by one, forming up in the sky. The sound is the same as Pearl Harbor, but the feeling is different. The ocean below is not a surprise victim. It is a chessboard where the enemy has already seen part of the plan. As the Japanese planes approach Midway, the island's defenders are waiting. Anti-aircraft guns thump. Fighters climb. Bombs fall anyway. And fires bloom on the atoll. Hangars burn. Runways are cratered. Men shout through smoke. The Japanese strike leader radios back. Midway is damaged, but not neutralized. Another strike may be needed. This is the moment where doctrine and instinct collide. On the Japanese carriers, the second wave is being readied. Aircraft in the hangars are armed for anti-ship work. Torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, meant for American ships if they appear. But the report from the Midway strike suggests the island still threatens them. Nagumo hesitates. He orders the reserve aircraft to be rearmed for a second attack on the atoll. In the hangar decks, crews begin to swap weapons. Torpedoes are rolled away. Bombs are brought in. Fuel lines are connected. The hangars become busy, crowded, flammable. Then, new information arrives, like a sudden gust that changes a fire's direction. A scout plane reports sighting American ships. Not carriers at first, just ships. But ships mean carriers might be nearby. Nagumo's staff argue in tight voices. Some urge immediate attack. Others insist on finishing Midway. The rearming process is already underway, half completed. Changing again will waste time, but waiting will invite the Americans to strike. Nagumo orders another reversal. Rearm again for anti-ship attack. Now the hangar decks are chaos of lethal objects. Bombs stacked, torpedoes moved back, fuel fumes everywhere. Men rushing, sweating, shouting above the rumble of engines. It is a juggling act with live explosives. Above, Japanese combat air patrol Zero Circle, ready to intercept. Below, on Midway, American pilots are already taking off to attack the carriers they cannot see but know must exist. Torpedo squadrons from the island head out low over the water. Slow, exposed, they will arrive first, and they will bleed. And far to the northeast, hidden by distance and luck, American carriers close in, their decks preparing dive bombers whose crews do not yet know how close they are to changing the Pacific forever. From Midway, the first American attackers arrive in scattered groups, and they arrive in the worst way possible. A torpedo plane is a slow animal. It has to fly straight and low to drop its weapon, giving the ship time to dodge and the fighters time to kill. In the cockpit, a pilot grips the controls so hard his knuckles ache. His gunner behind him peers through a ring sight that feels useless against sleek fighters. Japanese Zeros dive out of the sky like hawks. The first American torpedo squadron is cut apart. Tracer rounds stitch the air. Fabric and metal tear. A plane lurches, trailing smoke, and then hits the water so hard it disintegrates into white spray. Another tries to turn, but at that altitude, there is nowhere to go. The sea rises, the horizon tilts, the engine coughs once and stops. On the Japanese carriers, men watch the attack through binoculars. They see American torpedoes splash and run, and they see their ships turn sharply, wakes curling like scythe. The Japanese gunners fire with confidence. The Zeros keep slashing down, and the American planes keep falling. It looks like proof. Proof that the Americans are still clumsy, still predictable, still throwing away men. In the air, the Japanese fighter pilots are drawn lower and lower, chasing the torpedo planes to the deck. Their world narrows to targets skimming the surface. They do not know they are being pulled like a leash. On the American carrier, Enterprise, dive bomber crews sit strapped in, sweat pooling under their flight helmets. They have been circling, searching, guided by fragments of contact reports, by intuition, by the thin thread of timing. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey leads the Enterprise Air Group, scanning the sea from altitude. He sees nothing but emptiness for long minutes that feel like hours. Fuel gauges tick down. The pressure builds in his chest, tight as a fist. Then he sees a ship, a Japanese destroyer, Arashi, tearing across the water at high speed, leaving a long white wake behind her. A ship racing like that is not moving at random. She is rejoining something. McCluskey makes the decision. He follows the wake. It is a gamble made in seconds, and it feels like stepping off a cliff. The dive bombers angle toward the line of foam, engines changing pitch. The sea below flashes by, then ahead, like a sudden revelation. The Japanese carrier force comes into view. 4 carriers, wakes interlacing, their decks busy, anti-aircraft guns already twitching. In the Japanese formation, the air is still thick with the aftermath of the torpedo attacks. Fighters are low. Deck crews are in the middle of frantic rearming. Planes sit fueled and armed, packed tightly. Bomb carts, torpedo dollies, hoses, men. The carriers look, in that instant, like loaded powder magazines. High above, the American dive bombers arrive. They come down almost unopposed at first because the Japanese combat air patrol is at the wrong altitude, scattered, chasing ghosts at wave height. The sky that should have been guarded is briefly open. On Enterprise, Bombing Squadron 6 and Scouting Squadron 6 roll over and begin their dives. The world turns vertical. Wind screams around the canopy. The carrier grows larger in the sight. A gray rectangle with a red circle. Flag snapping. On Yorktown, dive bombers find their own target. Soryu, slipping through the formation. Their leader steadies, then pushes into the dive. The aircraft shuddering as speed builds. On Kaga, the deck is crowded with aircraft. Men are moving bombs and hoses. An officer looks up and sees specks falling, and for a half-second his mind refuses to name what he is seeing. Then the first bombs hit. A blast erupts on Kaga's flight deck, a violent flash that throws aircraft aside like toys. Another bomb punches through, detonating among fueled planes in the hangar. Fire leaps outward, hungry and instant. A chain reaction begins, explosions rolling through the interior like thunder in a tunnel. On Akagi, a bomb strikes near the center line, punching into the hangar and setting off fuel and munitions. The ship shudders. Men are thrown off their feet. The air fills with smoke so thick it tastes like metal. On Soryu, bombs slam down, and flames race across the deck. The carrier's elegant shape becomes a furnace. In a span of minutes that feels unreal, 3 of Nagumo's 4 carriers are mortally wounded. The pride of Pearl Harbor, the core of Japanese carrier strength, is burning. On Akagi's bridge, Nagumo watches through smoke-tinted glasses as black clouds rise and flames lick up. Orders are shouted. Damage control parties scramble. Fire hoses spray streams that vanish into the heat. Men choke and cough, eyes watering, faces streaked with soot. This is not how it was supposed to happen. The American attack is not slow. It is sudden, decisive, and perfectly timed to the moment of greatest Japanese vulnerability. For the first time, the mocking certainty cracks. The Americans did not stumble into the trap. They arrived early. They arrived prepared. They struck with carrier tactics that feel like a new language written in fire. Yet the battle is not finished. One Japanese carrier remains operational. Hiryu, separated slightly from the others, has been spared the first catastrophe, and in the smoke above the burning ships, Hiryu's aircraft begin to launch, their pilots looking at the inferno below and feeling not just anger, but a fierce need to prove the Japanese spirit can still reverse the day. From Hiryu, the last surviving Japanese fleet carrier, the flight deck is suddenly the center of a different kind of energy. Not confident laughter now, not tidy execution of a plan, but a sharp and urgent determination. The air officer waves his flags. Engines roar. A line of dive bombers begins to roll forward. Hiryu's commander, Captain Tomeo Kaku, knows what has happened. 3 carriers are burning. The battle has already turned into a nightmare. But he also knows something else. The Americans have shown their hand. Their carriers must be near, and if Hiryu can hit them, the balance might swing back. In the cockpits, Japanese pilots stare at the smoke rising from Akagi. Kaga, Soryu. Some have friends down there. Some have mentors. Some have men they trained with, drank with, laughed with. Their throats tighten, and then they clamp down on the emotion and turn it into focus. They launch, the strike group forms, climbing into a sky that seems suddenly hostile. Over the radio, voices crackle, bearings, altitudes, fuel. The pilots know they are flying into the teeth of American defenses, but the old carrier doctrine still holds. A carrier battle can turn with a single, well-placed blow. Hours earlier, Japanese officers were mocking American command. Now, the surviving Japanese carrier is gambling on a counterpunch. The first Hiryu strike finds Yorktown. Yorktown is a ship that looks battered even before the attack. Her repairs at Pearl Harbor were rushed. The kind of repairs that keep a fighter on his feet but do not erase the bruises. Her crew knows this. They have felt the ship's vibrations, heard the odd groans in bulkheads, smelled the fresh paint laid over burned steel. When radar picks up incoming aircraft, the alarms wail. Men run to their stations. Boots pounding, voices shouting. Anti-aircraft guns swing up. Ammunition feeds clatter on the flight deck. Aircraft are moved, chalked, prepared. You can feel the tension in the air like static. Japanese dive bombers appear as small dots, then as shapes, then as screaming machines dropping toward the carrier as in steep dives. Their engines howl. Their shadows race across the sea. American fighters rise to intercept. But there are not enough. And the Japanese pilots are experienced, aggressive. They weave through flak bursts that look like black flowers blooming in the air. A bomb hits Yorktown. The explosion punches through the deck, detonating inside. Fire erupts. Another bomb strikes, and the ship shudders again. Smoke pours upward. Men are thrown, some stunned, some bleeding, but damage control teams move with rehearsed speed. Hoses come alive. Bulkheads are sealed. Fire parties attack the flames with foam and water. Yorktown slows. Her power compromised. For a moment, it seems she might be finished. Then her engineers claw her back. Below decks, in heat and noise. Men in the engine rooms fight the ship as if it is a living creature trying to die. They reroute steam. They patch lines. They work by feel and instinct. Sweat dripping into their eyes. Shirts soaked. Somewhere above them, bombs have torn holes that let daylight spill down in harsh beams. And then, against expectation, Yorktown's speed returns. Her listing is corrected. Her deck crews resume work, moving aircraft, preparing to launch again. The ship refuses to go down. In Hiryu's operations spaces, there is confusion when reports come back. The Americans are damaged, yes, but not destroyed. The pilots insist they hit a carrier, maybe even sank her. But the American carrier is still moving, still fighting. The Americans are not collapsing the way Japanese planners expected. Hiryu prepares a second strike, this time with torpedo planes. The torpedo bombers launch low and steady, their crews grim. They fly toward the reported position of the American carriers, skimming the water, looking for the gray shape that will be their target. They find Yorktown again, still there, still alive, smoke trailing but not sinking. The torpedo planes split, approaching from different angles to force evasive turns. American anti-aircraft guns fire in continuous streams. The air fills with tracer lines, red and white. Water erupts in tall splashes as shells hit the sea. A torpedo hits Yorktown on the port side. The blast sends a shiver through the ship, then another as a second torpedo strikes. The carrier lurches. Her list increases sharply. Men slide across decks. Tools and equipment roll. The hangar deck fills with smoke and the smell of seawater flooding compartments. The order comes. Abandon ship. But even then, it is not panic. It is a controlled retreat. Men moving with discipline, climbing down ropes and nets into the sea. Some look back at their ship with disbelief. She has been hit again and again, and still she floats, stubborn and wounded, on the American carriers Enterprise and Hornet. The news hits hard. Yorktown has taken the blows. She has bought time. She has absorbed Hiryu's counterpunch. And now the American commanders know Hiryu is out there, the last sharp tooth in a broken jaw. The hunt begins immediately. American scout planes range outward. Radio calls overlap. Bearings and distances are shouted. The ocean becomes a grid again, not empty, but filled with invisible lines of probability. Late in the afternoon, American aircraft find Hiryu. From the cockpit of an American dive bomber, the Japanese carrier looks smaller than the myth. It is just steel and paint and a flight deck with tiny figures running. But it is also the last chance for Japan to salvage the day. The dive bombers roll over and drop. Bombs slam into Hiryu. Explosions rip across her deck. Fire erupts, bright and violent. Smoke rises. joining the dark columns already climbing from the other carriers. The last surviving Japanese fleet carrier becomes another burning island on the sea. With Hiryu burning, the battle's outcome is sealed. But the emotional shift is still catching up. In Japanese command spaces, officers stare at maps that no longer make sense. The Americans did not behave as predicted. They did not rush blindly. They used intelligence. They used carrier tactics with precision. They took risks, but calculated ones. On June 5th and June 6th, the aftermath continues. Japanese ships retreat. Some are hunted by American aircraft and submarines. The sea claims wreckage and men. The smell of smoke lingers over miles of water. And in Japan, the confidence that once produced mocking jokes now feels like a fragile thing that has been dropped and shattered. American aircraft still patrol, engines droning, searching for stragglers. Below, ships move carefully, wary of submarines. Somewhere, men are still in the water, clinging to anything that floats. Their lips cracked with salt, their eyes swollen from glare. They look up at passing planes and do not always know whose they are anymore. On the Japanese side, the retreat is not the clean withdrawal of a force that can choose when to leave. It is a wounded animal limping away while trying not to show weakness. Aboard Japanese cruisers and destroyers, officers stand on bridges with faces set hard. Their uniforms are crisp, but their eyes are not. Their voices are clipped. They give orders that are correct, but not confident. In the distance, the wrecks of carriers burn lower now. Flames dulled as fuel and aviation gas are exhausted. Smoke continues to rise, but it is thinner, more like a funeral incense than a triumphant signal. Men who served on Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu are pulled from the sea. Some half-conscious, some already gone. Survivors shiver in blankets, hands trembling, cheeks hollow. When they speak, they do not speak in the boastful tones of December. They speak in fragments, like men describing a storm that came out of nowhere. American ships recover what they can, too. The destroyer, Hammond, lies broken, torn apart while assisting Yorktown, killed by a submarine attack that feels like an aftershock. Yorktown herself, abandoned and listing, will not survive much longer. She holds on for hours, stubborn to the end, before finally rolling and slipping beneath the waves. Even in victory, the Americans are reminded that the Pacific does not hand out clean endings. But the point of Midway is not the tally of ships sunk. It is the change in belief. In the days that follow, American commanders gather in dim briefing rooms, voices low, faces drawn. They go over contact reports, strike timings, mistakes, and near disasters. They do not treat Midway like a miracle. They treat it like a lesson that almost went wrong. They know how close it was, how a late scout report, a missed contact, a different decision could have changed the day. And that is precisely what Japanese commanders must now confront. At Japanese headquarters, the mood is heavy. Staff officers shuffle papers with hands that feel suddenly clumsy. The language of reports becomes careful. Numbers are written, then rewritten. Losses are described in phrases that try to soften the blow. But the reality presses through the wording like blood through bandages. 4 fleet carriers. The trained air crews that were the heart of Japanese naval aviation. Senior pilots who cannot be replaced quickly. Deck crews and mechanics who knew how to turn a carrier into a weapon. All gone. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the operation, reads the situation with a cold clarity that does not relieve the weight. The trap was meant to crush the American carriers and restore Japanese initiative. Instead, the Americans anticipated it. They used information, and they used it early enough to place their carriers in the right patch of ocean at the right time. The Japanese had mocked American commanders as slow and predictable. Now the mockery tastes bitter. The Americans did not simply react. They maneuvered. They withheld their carriers from being found. They struck at the moment when Japanese decks were most vulnerable, when bombs and torpedoes were being shifted, when fuel and munitions crowded the hangars. It was not luck alone. It was intelligence work. It was command decision. It was carrier doctrine maturing in the fire of war. For Japanese officers who had believed in a kind of inherited superiority, Midway is more than a defeat. It is a crack in the foundation, in the wardrooms where jokes once circled like smoke. Conversations become quieter. The tone shifts from certainty to caution, from laughter to calculation. A younger officer might still mutter that the Americans were fortunate, that timing favored them, but even he feels the unease under his own words. Because the Americans did not behave like an opponent who will always do the same thing. They behaved like an opponent who learns, and the Japanese, too, are forced to learn. But they learn under a different burden. Their victory culture had been built on flawless execution, on offensive spirit, on the belief that their navy was the sharpest blade in the world. That belief had been reinforced at Pearl Harbor. When an enemy fleet looked helpless in harbor, when surprise made the Americans appear slow and blind, Midway proves that Pearl Harbor was not a permanent truth. It was a moment when the Americans were caught. A moment that the Japanese misread as a permanent condition of American command. In the months after Midway, the Pacific War changes character. Japan is still dangerous, still capable of sudden strikes and fierce defense. But the strategic initiative begins to slip. The Americans, bruised but alive, start to build, repair, train, and expand their reach. Their carrier forces will grow. Their pilots will gain experience. Their commanders will become more aggressive, more coordinated. For Japan, the losses at Midway cannot be replaced at the same speed. The carriers that burned are not just steel. They are time. They are training pipelines. They are years of expertise turned into smoke. And beneath all of that is something less tangible but equally lethal: doubt. Once it enters a command structure, doubt changes the way orders are given, the way risks are taken, the way initiative is seized. It makes men hesitate at the precise moments when hesitation is fatal. On June 7th, 1942, the sea over Midway finally begins to look normal again, as if the Pacific is trying to erase the evidence. But the men who fought there will not forget. American sailors will remember the torpedo squadrons flying into death to pull the Japanese fighters low. Japanese sailors will remember the sudden vertical fall of dive bombers out of a sky that should have been guarded. And somewhere, in some quiet room where officers once laughed at the idea of American cunning, a Japanese admiral sits with a report in his hands, reading the same lines again and again, not because he cannot understand them, because he can